Thanks very much, everybody. I know it's still quite early. There was a lot of wine last night, so I appreciate the attendance. Today, I'm going to be talking about Denticle Déjà vu. Some of you will seen a version of this talk previously when I was talking specifically about the evolution of speed. One of the more interesting aspects of my project has been looking at the convergent evolution of shark scales with those of Paleozoic taxa. So really today I'm going to be talking a synthesis of my entire PhD, 3.5 years of my life, a synthesis of the convergence and the comparative anatomy side, but also some of the experimental and empirical data that we've managed to get. So I'm afraid I'll have to talk about fluid mechanics for a second. It won't actually be 3 minutes, it'll be 30 seconds. Turn your tap on in the morning, nice and slowly. The water that's flowing out of that tap is nice, crystal clear. It looks like a pipe of glass. The water molecules are behaving very well. They're sliding past each other, and they're more attracted to each other as molecules than forces involved in velocity are separating them out and making them go crazy. So that's laminar flow, that's at the bottom. The one at the top there, you turn your tap on a bit faster, the water is white, the molecules are moving not only in a nice straight ordered line, they're moving up, down, sideways. The influence of velocity, the influence of energy is starting to move those molecules around a bit more, and that's turbulent flow. So those are the two basic states of fluid movements. So bear that in mind throughout this talk. The reason that's important for fish, I'll talk about golf first, if that's all right. Just bear in mind this idea of laminar, nicely behaved flow, and turbulent flow, where it's a bit messier. People started to notice when they were playing golf in Victorian England that the people who had the older balls that were bashed were going further and faster than the balls that they just bought new. So people started to hammer dimples into their own golf balls to make them go further and faster. And this is all to do with fluid mechanics, although it wasn't really appreciated at the time. People thought that the ideal situation, a nice smooth surface, would mean that the fluid was more ordered and that the velocity of the ball would be improved, that drag would be reduced by having a nice perfect surface. In this case, we have the one at the top, the golf ball. This is the golf ball, the fluid's moving towards the golf ball and it's flowing and it wants to move away. After that point of the widest point of the golf ball, the fluid wants to keep going forwards, and you get this stagnant area behind where the air is starting to return on itself, it's starting to produce vortices, stall. That's essentially what's happening. What's happening at that point in the golf ball is the same thing as happens when a plane wing is too steep. The golf ball on the bottom there with the dimples is creating turbulence on purpose. It's creating a bit of mess and a bit of chaos, hence the title, and it's returning some of the momentum of the energy of that fluid back towards the surface. So not only do we have fluid moving in one direction, we have it up, down, sideways, but most importantly, some of that momentum is pushing the fluid back towards the golf ball. The wake is smaller, and the influence of stall is smaller as such. So while laminar flow is ideal, most cases we have this golf ball scenario, and one of the hypotheses of this project was that we have golf ball sharks. We have sharks and other fishes that have a scaled surface, a rough surface, which I suppose you'd think would be not quite as perfect as a smooth surface, but that's somehow helping by reducing the overall effect of wake and of stall. So that's one aspect of this, to investigate the hydrodynamics of sharks and their ancestors. The other more famous investigation side is the riblets. People have heard of the speedo suit, the underside of boats, they use it on planes, inside pipes. These riblets, these grooves and troughs and peaks that you find on the surface of shark scales are reducing drag, and the way that they're doing that is they're calming down the influence of that turbulent flow. As I mentioned, with turbulent flow you've got molecules moving up, down and sideways. What these riblets are essentially doing is calming that down. They're training those vortices in a bit so that the momentum that's going left and right is trained in a bit, and that can reduce drag too by up to 10% in ideal situations. So to test this in fossil fish, see if the scales are doing the same sort of thing as modern sharks and modern fishes. We took some micro-CT of some Paleozoic taxa. These included acanthodians, which of course are basically chondrichthyes, and thelodonts as well, the jawless fish, and also an osteichthyon as well. Most of the taxa we chose, we had a very fair idea that the scale itself, the hard part of the scale, was in direct contact with the water. So that's quite important because with the hard part being preserved and being exposed to the actual water in modern sharks, and presumably these ancestors as well, there's no influence of soft tissue, which messes things up a lot, especially mucus. Mucus gets in the way and it reduces drag quite a lot, and we can't account for that in the fossil record. So anyway, so that's the taxa we chose. We have 5 of these plates, rapid prototypes, in very high resolution, and this is a reconstruction of the fish skin. You can hardly see the scales because they are very, very small. The rapid prototyping is 16 micron layers. It's a really, really high resolution rapid prototyping, and it's 9 microns in the XY direction, so we're talking about very high resolution. This is in the flume tank here. We are passing water over a nice flat plate, and what we can do then is we can measure the velocity at different points across that plate, not just across the surface along here, but also up and down away from the surface as well. Now, the way that we do this is the same principle as a police speed gun, but instead of a policeman holding a police speed gun and watching cars go past, the Doppler effect of tiny particles of silver-coated glass are being used instead. This is the gold standard for measuring velocity. We can build up velocity profiles like this, and these are the hotter areas at the bottom are slower moving fluid, and the blue is the stream speeds, the normal speed of the flume. I want you to imagine in your heads a pack of cards, and I'm going to throw this pack of cards across a table. Each one of those cards is a layer of water molecules, and if I throw them across the table, the card that's in immediate contact with that table is going to slow down very quickly. The one above that is going to move slightly further and slightly faster. The one above that, further and faster still. And we're going to eventually have the card right at the top, which is moving at the same velocity as I threw them in the first place. So we're going to have fluid at the top, which is moving at the same velocity as the flume tank itself. And we build up a velocity profile, something like this. With this method, LDA, the laser method I talked about, we can get things like this. This is just one example from one point in the plate. We have speed along the bottom there, and the distance from the surface. So just exactly what you saw in the previous slide, but this is some real data. Every flume tank in the world is going to be slightly different. The temperature of the water can affect things. Slight changes in water properties can change things. So it's in our best interest to standardise this and create a dimensionless number for this drag, the energy loss. We don't have to worry too much about the maths. If you're interested later, I can talk about it. But these are measurements of what's called U star. This is a dimensionless number of energy loss. So that the vertical column there is drag, essentially, and along the bottom is the distance across the plate. Just very roughly, in summarising, we get this result. We have some scales which are reducing drag, these ones over here, and we have some that are increasing drag. The ones that are increasing drag, in fact, the one that is increasing drag relative to the completely smooth plate, it's very knobbly, it's very pointy. It's actually the one that we hypothesised would be more adept for parasite resistance rather than reducing drag. But what's really interesting is these morphologies are quite different. We have the riblets on some of these. We have huge, great big tubercles. We have fairly standard shark-looking scales there as well. And these all seem to be reducing drag. The one over here may not be reducing drag by much, but the important point is, compared to a completely smooth surface, they don't seem to be affecting it in a negative way too much. Now, scales are very important for several reasons. Mechanical defence, as a calcium reservoir also. So having scales generally is a good thing, and it doesn't seem to be compromising drag in the majority of cases. So that's a really nice result. That's more of the experimental side of this project. The more interesting side is the convergence, the scale convergence. In modern sharks, we have scales which are adapted for abrasion defence, for bioluminescence, where there's a trade-off between surface area of skin exposed to glow in the dark and protection. And then we have these fantastic trident-like parasite-resistant scales as well. And we find these in the fossil record too. And drag reduction is obviously the most famous one because of the speedo suit, etc., and these riblets that I talked about. And the convergence is really quite striking. These are just 6 examples of some convergence on the scales. It's remarkable, really, how convergent these things are. Unrelated taxa, separated by about 200 million years, and 400 million years, and it's really quite remarkable. I can't go into that too much today. But we can construct a framework for the function of these scales based on modern sharks, and that's all well and good. But really the thing we're interested in is the riblets, this sexy, speedo, novel adaptation for reducing drag. And what's really interesting is when people have been investigating the optimization of these riblet structures for industrial applications, they notice that the distance between those riblets is really important. To be as efficient as possible, at higher speeds, the riblets are closer together, and at slower speeds, they're slightly further apart. This is to do with the vortices that are forming across the surface. So that's the basic premise. We decided to look at this in modern sharks. The flank region of the shark was chosen because it's the biggest area of the shark, but it's also the least variable in terms of riblet distance. Measured lots and lots of scales, too many to be sane still. And again, the basic premise of this, in modern sharks, we are expecting that the faster sharks, based on ecological data and flume tank studies, etc., the faster sharks are going to have narrower riblets. So we looked into this, and yeah, that seems to be the case. Rather nice results, actually. The slower sharks at the bottom there have riblets which are quite far apart, and the fastest extant sharks, the pelagic sharks that have these riblets, are fairly close together. So that's really nice. We then extended it to some Paleozoic taxa. So these are the acanthodians, vaguely related to chondrichthyans, of course, and they fall nicely within the fastest extant shark category. Of course, we're making the assumption here that the physics and the modern trends are applying to fossil taxa, but there's really no reason not to assume that. The really interesting result, however, is even before jaws evolved in the thelodonts, we have these riblets, and we have riblet distances which are very, very small. Now, there are plenty and plenty of thelodont scales and acanthodian scales that have these riblets. I only included the ones where we knew it was from the flank region. So actually the sample sizes, this is really an underestimation of the diversity and occurrence of this riblets adaptation. What's really interesting, this is Tantalepis. We don't know that it's from the flank region of this chondrichthyan-like animal, but this scale has riblets. Other animals around the same time had these riblets. We don't know that they're from the flank region, so we can't apply the same, but they do fall within that category. This leads us to some quite interesting conclusions. Scales don't compromise drag. At best, they reduce it, but they don't compromise it, just being there. So a rougher surface, rather counterintuitively, can be a good thing. But really the most interesting thing right at the bottom there, possibly up to 460 million years ago, right at the dawn of vertebrate evolution, as things are starting to become pelagic, we have this novel adaptation for speed, which has been made sexy by Speedo only recently. So that's me. Thank you very much.